going on here?
Invasions.
But you damned young idiot, war starts at midnight.
In 1943, Rank Films released The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp. This epic tale charted the life of Clive Wynne Candy, an upper-class English soldier. This unique and ambitious production not only satirized the reactionary old guard in the British Army, it also paid tribute to a lost era of decency and honour. The film was made by the Archers, the production company run by two of the most celebrated figures in British cinema, director Michael Powell and Hungarian-born screenwriter Emmerich Pressburger.
I was at university and I was 18, and Colonel Blimp happened to be showing at a film club, and I was absolutely knocked out by it. I thought it was quite unlike any other film I'd ever seen, and that made me feel very proud that this was my grandfather who played a large part in making this. But one of the things that really sort of stuck out for me was that I could see so much of Emmerich in that film. It seemed so personal. I could see that it had come from him. And that was very moving for me and very inspiring.
There are three great sights that stir the blood when a film begins, a British film. One is I suppose, the little symbols around an Ealing studio production. Another is the gong with Bombardier Billy Wells to strike it, and you know it's Rank Film. And the other, perhaps most provocative and exciting of all, is the coloured image of the target, red, white and blue, with the arrows going into it, archers. Something about them. I don't know what it is about Michael Powell. He just has an extraordinary visual imagination, and what's wonderful is that he and Pressburger, who wrote the scripts, also use language brilliantly, and it's very rare to get those together, and it's magnificent.
As independent producers whose work was distributed through Rank Films, Powell and Pressburger enjoyed a great deal of creative freedom, plus Rank's financial and distribution power. Their first venture into the new medium of Technicolor, The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, would prove to be their most ambitious effort to date, and their most controversial.
What's it?
Roger Livesey gave what was literally the performance of a lifetime as Clive Wynne Candy.
Your candy. Sugar candy.
Portraying him as a dashing young officer, quite a rebel in his day, through middle age, and finally as an old man, unable to accept that the old rules of warfare no longer apply.
A real army, eh? The men are all right, keen as mustard. Organization, general staff, offices, general headquarters, that's what we want, and by gad, we'll get them.
Powell and Pressburger's original choice for the role had been Laurence Olivier, but Livesey, a last-minute replacement, would prove to be perfect casting.
Roger Livesey, wonderful Roger Livesey. He's the most marvellous actor, Roger Livesey. He's got the extraordinary hoarse voice. I don't know where it comes from, and it's just lovely. And he is an actor who really, I think, without Michael Powell, I would really not have known. I mean, you occasionally see him in the odd non-Archers film. His two great performances are in A Matter of Life and Death, and obviously, most magisterially, in Colonel Blimp.
This is it.
He becomes this extraordinary image, this bald colonel, for whom nothing was good enough, and the way that modern people did it, well, my day, you know. And the film of Colonel Blimp is told in flashback,
General Wynne Candy.
and a trick is played on him, which humiliates him.
Get out of here, sir, you and your gang of awful militia gangsters. Get out!
The film owes its title to the popular satirical cartoons by David Lowe, but the character on screen would prove to be far more complex.
I am Major General Wynne Candy. These other gentlemen have all seen service. Distinguished service with the British Army.
All I can say, sir, that when Napoleon said that an army marched on its stomach, I better stop, sir.
You're an extremely impudent young officer.
Powell and Pressburger always said that the idea for the Blimp film came not from the cartoon series, the character who had appeared in the strip cartoon, but actually from a scene that was cut from one of their earlier films, One of Our Aircraft is Missing, where one of the elderly members of the crew had said to a younger one, "You don't know what it's like to be old."
But let me tell you that in 40 years' time, you'll be an old gentleman too. And if your belly keeps pace with your head, you'll have a bigger one than any of us.
Maybe I shall in 40 years, but I doubt it. And I doubt if I'll have time to grow a moustache like yours, sir. But in 1983, at least I shall be able to say that 40 years ago, I was a fellow of enterprise.
They called him Blimp, and they're saying, look at what the Blimp really is. We have this image of our head of Colonel Blimp, who's a figure like, you know, that you mock. But let's suppose he's a real person. It's like giving life to the unknown soldier. What would his background be?
I'll punch your head for that, young fellow. You young puppy, put him up.
And that's really what Colonel Blimp is. It's an epic story of how a man came to be what he was when he was 70 years old.
A much younger Clive Wynne Candy emerges from the pool, and we're transported back 40 years to 1902.
Everything you want, Mr. Candy, sir?
Yes, thanks, Peters.
Clive is a young officer who has just returned from distinguished service in the Boer War. It's the first of 3 conflicts in the film, each heralding a different chapter in the life of the man who will become Colonel Blimp.
Cheer up, England isn't as bad as all that, you know.
Clive impetuously travels to Berlin, where he meets Edith, the first of 3 performances from Deborah Kerr.
Das ist ja eine schöne Überraschung, Herr Candy.
Edith has reported a spy spreading negative propaganda about the British in South Africa. When Clive meets the spy, he causes a diplomatic incident of his own.
Stop it, Carnets, I'm with a lady.
You should have thought of that before you started your little joke. Erlauben Sie mir, dass
Stop it, Carnets.
Take off your... Come on, be a good lad. Was machst du? Come in, Colonel!
Get back to your table.
As part of his code of honour, Clive is ordered to take part in a duel with his opposite number, a German soldier he's never met.
Where is Theo Kretschmar Schuldorf?
Oh, he hasn't shown up yet.
I congratulate you on your pronunciation of the name.
I learned it by heart, so that when my grandchildren say, Grandpa, have you ever cut anybody's ear off? I shall be able to say, yes, Theo Kretschmar Schuldorf.
I think one of the great moments in Life and Death of Colonel Blimp is the duel scene. It's a scene which has been greatly admired. Martin Scorsese has often talked about it as a big influence on him. Conventionally, you might expect a duel to be a build-up, certainly, and then the actual fight itself, and then the question of who's going to win. Well, of course, this duel is not about that at all. Neither of the 2 figures wants to fight, and there's nothing personal in it. And so, in a sense, the staging exactly reflects that. There's a tremendous sense of build-up, a lot of emphasis on all the protocol. It's very funny in a way, as they kind of go through all the preparations for the duel. And having got us all keyed up to this point, and the first blows having been struck, suddenly the camera goes sailing up in the air, through the roof, wonderful model shot as it comes out, as it were, through the roof, and we suddenly see a picture postcard scene of Berlin twinkling under starlight in the early winter morning. And we're in a different world. We're in a world which is a kind of fairy tale world where people are sitting in coaches. And I think what Powell and Pressburger want us to feel, what they wanted the audience in 1943 to feel, we still feel, is this sense that it is another world. It lies on the far side of 2 world wars. It's a world of kind of chivalry and innocence and men with sabres fighting duels. And it creates it perfectly. And we're left hanging in suspense, knowing that somehow this is all going to set the story in motion, and the outcome of the duel really doesn't matter. It's a great moment of cinema, I think.
What the blazes is up with everybody today?
Clive, you and I, friends, yes or no?
Well, of course we're friends.
In a more conventional film, the 2 duelists would become sworn enemies. But while they recuperate in hospital, these 2 professional soldiers become the best of friends.
I love your...
The role of the German soldier went to the Austrian actor Anton Walbrook.
Your Miss Hunter.
He really was a fantastic actor, and he plays this Theo, the great friend of Wynne Candy's, of Blimp's. And they meet early on at a time really when Europe was at its last civilized state before the First World War, when you have these marvellous Viennese waltzes going on in this cafe, and the whole Junker Prussian mentality of German militarism with its codes of honor and dueling and so on.
I love your Miss Hunter.
You're cuckoo.
Oh, nein, ich nein cuckoo. You cuckoo, because Miss Hunter loves me.
Congratulations. When did it happen? Why don't I know about it?
Theo Kretschmar-Schuldorff, Clive's very proud of himself when he learns how to say his name, is part of a line of characters which the Archers created. The sympathetic German, and a man who does his duty, even though his duty makes him an enemy of Britain. He's on the other side, as it were. They went on creating these sympathetic Germans, and they were always at great pains to distinguish between a German and a Nazi.
May I kiss the bride?
Theo marries Edith, and it's only on returning home that Clive realises how much he loves her.
Goodbye, Clive.
Goodbye, Edith, old girl.
But in typical Archer's style, the emptiness of his life is depicted in comic fashion.
I hope we'll meet again sometime.
Some of the parts of it, of course, now would be so politically incorrect as almost to be unscreenable, you would imagine. For example, the bit where a lacuna, I suppose, in his career, while he's waiting for another war, he goes off to Africa. He's a big game hunter. You see a room in his house in Mayfair, just filled with huge heads of elephants and lions and leopards and all kinds of things which are now deeply endangered.
I can't think of anything in the cinema of the 1940s that has that same sort of sense of wit. I mean, it's the kind of thing you really can imagine a 1960s filmmaker doing out of a sense of irreverence. We don't need to have the boring details. We don't need to see Clive in these places. We just need to know that all he did was go and shoot big animals. But I think as we see that sequence and just think about the boldness of doing it as a rapid montage sequence, using sound and music, it just shows you how, even in 1943, the Archers were kind of thinking about a new syntax for film.
The director of photography on Colonel Blimp was Georges Perinal, but the cameraman behind these bizarre sequences was Jack Cardiff.
I was a junior staff cameraman at Technicolor, been for 2 or 3 years, and doing odd bits, but my yearning ambition naturally was to photograph a big feature film. And I was actually working on the second unit for Blimp at the time, and I had one shot to do which was a much more complicated one and more interesting, of a wall with animals, stuffed animals' heads on the wall. And it was difficult to light because with all the horns it made mass shadows all over the place. But being on the second unit, I didn't have this pressure to work fast. I was able to work things out. So I suppose I'd done a good job on it. And I heard a voice behind me as I looked through the camera say, very interesting. I looked round and there was the great Michael Powell. And he was sort of looking at it sort of quizzically and looking at the lighting. And then he turned to me and he said, would you like to photograph my next picture? And I said, oh, yes, Mr. Powell, of course, I'd like that very much. He said, well, we start in 6 months. And he was off. And he never used to walk, he used to bound, you know, always full of energy. And I thought later, well, he's just said that, you know, and he'll forget all about it.
But Powell didn't forget about the inventive young cameraman. Jack Cardiff would go on to become a key member of the Archers team, photographing such Technicolor epics as A Matter of Life and Death and Black Narcissus. One of the most celebrated cinematographers of the 20th century, he regards working with Powell as one of the most exciting periods of his career.
Michael Powell is a cameraman's dream because he instills enthusiasm into everybody. He's enthusiastic himself and very fast and thinks very quickly and so on. And he welcomes any ideas. One of the few directors I know that hasn't got any kind of chicken qualms about things. You know, if you say, Mickey, why don't we do this upside down or something, he'd say, do it, I love it, it's a great idea. You know, he'd never say, well, you know, a bit dodgy, let's compromise. Never any of that with Michael.
Another important factor in Blimp was the work of the art department.
Alfred Younger was the
what they called the art director of the art department at that time. One of the great scenes there is where he is visited in the prisoner of war camp, which was shot on the back lot, or on the lot by the riverbank at Denham.
Tail.
Rather a touching scene with all the prisoners of war in the background. I think we had lots of cutouts and things in the background because it was meant to be thousands of prisoners of war then, but we didn't have access to that number, and certainly as far as German uniforms were concerned. Yes, so we did use quite a few there, interspersed of course with live crowd to put the movement into the scene. The sets were beautiful sets. I mean, the Turkish bath set at the beginning where he's captured. And for that, incidentally, Roger Livesey was rather a lithe, athletic young man. And he had to have this enormous Colonel Blimp tummy, which Tony Sforzini, the makeup man, had it made in plaster. So if you can't see the join really, but he's lying there with a plaster tummy. Very noteworthy.
The second act of Colonel Blimp sees Clive back in action. The year is 1918, and Europe has been torn apart by the First World War, a conflict very different from those of Clive's youth.
This is Dead Cow Crossroads, sir.
Question is whether that's the church with the double tower or the Estaminet de Pont.
But for Clive, one thing remains the same, the memory of his lost love. Once again played by Deborah Carr, Barbara is a young nurse who Clive will later marry.
Come on, Win.
The final act of Blimp takes place in 1942, at the height of the Second World War. The gentlemen soldiers of Clive's youth have been replaced with a new breed. Clive is now a founding member of the Home Guard, and lost love resurfaces once more, this time in the form of Angela, his driver. Clive will also meet Theo again, in very different circumstances.
I wouldn't be surprised if this fellow really disliked us. He comes to England twice in his life. The first time he's a prisoner, and the second time he's just about to be one.
Theo Kretschmar Schuldorf ends the film as a refugee from Germany, from Hitler's Germany, in England. A poor refugee with no future, no opportunity of job. And he gives this wonderful speech to the policeman who's interrogating him.
My wife was English. She would have loved to come back to England, but it seemed to me that I would be letting down my country in its greatest need, and so she stayed at my side. When in summer 33 we found that we had lost our children to the Nazi party, and I was willing to come, she died. None of my sons came to her funeral. Heil Hitler.
I think it's one of the most affecting and also one of the most serious things they ever did. And it needed an actor of Anton Volbruck's technical ability to bring it off, because it's a single, unbroken close-up. Quite an achievement.
I remembered the English countryside, the gardens, the green lawns, the weedy rivers and the trees. She loved so much. And a great desire came over me to come back to my wife's country.
For Emmerich Pressburger, Theo's situation had great personal resonance.
And this, sir, is the truth.
That was just Emmerich. I mean, he loved England more than anybody I've ever met. He was the biggest Anglophile you could ever possibly imagine. And that was absolutely him. It was just his words.
Whilst Clive holds on to the same values he held 40 years ago, Theo is aware that both the enemy and the nature of modern warfare have changed.
This is not a gentleman's war. This time you are fighting for your very existence against the most devilish idea ever created by a human brain. Nazism.
At a time when propaganda machines were churning all the time to show the nastiness of Germany, to make a film which showed the fraternal sense of honor amongst two high-born officers of those two countries seemed bizarre.
Powell and Pressburger may have portrayed German soldiers in a sympathetic light before, but the character of Theo, coupled with Blimp's inability to grasp the nature of modern warfare, made the duo some very powerful enemies.
Very quickly, news of it reached Winston Churchill, and Churchill went spare. I mean, he had been fighting hard ever since he took over as Prime Minister to dispel the Blimp image.
In a sense, you can't blame Churchill. In a sense, one of the odd things is, I don't know whether Churchill ever really felt this or dared to bring it to the surface of his mind, but Churchill was Blimp.
The Ministry of Information had opposed the film throughout its production, and it now looked as if the life and death of Colonel Blimp might never be released.
The War Office, the Ministry of Information, did everything they could to try and stop the film, but actually the person who saved it was Arthur Rank. He was producing the film, paying for it, and apparently he stood absolutely firm behind Powell and Pressburger, despite the opposition, and insisted that the film got made exactly as they wanted, put it in his cinemas, in Odeon cinemas, and showed it all around the country. In fact, they even advertised it as See the Band film.
The life and death of Colonel Blimp cost over £188,000, an enormous sum for 1943. But for many years the film was shown both in Britain and abroad in an edited version, robbing the film of 20 minutes and, more importantly, its flashback structure. When the film was finally restored in 1983, the re-released version of Blimp was hailed by critics as a lost masterpiece.
Clive, you won't change, will you? And don't ever leave this house.
No fear. Even if there's a second flood, this house shall always stand on its solid foundations. And we'll have a private lake in the basement.
That's a promise. You stay just as you are till the floods come.
Till the floods come.
And this is a lake.
And this is a lake.
When the film was restored back to its original length and form in the 1980s, Emmerich was deeply touched. And he came along to the premiere that we had of the new restoration. And he was so moved that he just couldn't speak, because for him it was like a sort of resurrection. His favourite film had been brought back, and he was deeply touched by that.
That's a promise. You stay just as you are till the floods come.
Till the floods come.
And this is a lake.
And this is a lake. Now, here is the lake, and I still haven't changed.
I would be surprised that anybody could sit in front of the film and feel no sympathy for Colonel Blimp. I think that would be a bizarre person who could watch that and not feel. And some may say it's sentimental in a British sort of way, and it probably is, but then I'm a sentimentalist.